Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the WAPP Roundtable for the Planning is the Key to Success of Railway PPP Projects. I'm Wayne Collins. I'll be the moderator today. I'm a member of the WAPP North America Leadership Committee, as well as the Rail chapter for WAPP, and the global home for public-private partnerships and professionals. And it's a pleasure to welcome all of our panelists and everyone here today. Just a couple of things on the technical side. The duration of this webinar will be 90 minutes. It will be recorded and it'll be available on the WAPP YouTube channel. The chat function is activated and for organization only. So please use the Q&A box for any content inquiries. We'll try to respond at our time during that together. The sequence of events is a short presentation. I'll just introduce the panelists, and then we have 4 questions, which I will highlight, and then have a good fulsome discussion. So, just a bit about what this webinar is about. Many of the railway projects that are offered, developed, and constructed and operated have fallen short based on recent experience of expected outcomes in terms of their return on investment, the user experience, and certainly the overall adherence to the UN SDGs. To manage the complexity of the bidding process, a thorough understanding is required of the difficulties in the rail projects, ranging from the technical and administrative to the territorial issues. The public sector is ubiquitous with owner of the operator of railways is rarely seen according to the status of a partner to private equity. So that's the perception that's out there in a rail PPP. Due to the low returns of the rail sector is often perceived as an investment option that is not attractive with many capable corporations. Okay, I'll be the moderator today. I've got 30 years of public and private sector experience. My focus the last couple of years is certainly in the public-private partnership sector. And I've got experience in several areas, and I'm an active member of WAPP and the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, as well as other facility management, asset management organizations. We've got a great panel today, and I'll go and introduce everybody. We've got 5 panelists. Start off with Dr. Naresh Bana. He's a peer-recognized international consultant. He's founded the BBV Consultants LLP in 2011, since advising on PPP for infrastructure projects in India and overseas. He's a steering committee member of the WAPP chairperson for the South Asia chapter. He's the vice chairman of the Indo-Sri Lanka Chamber of Commerce Industry, and he's also a regular contributor of the UN EC policy planning effort, inter alia, leading with the railway project team. His team has the credit of construction and green railway project in terrorism affected Jammu and Kashmir province of India. He's a distinguished engineer who was awarded a PhD for his work analyzing suitability of Swiss challenge approach, along with PPP for expediting road project delivery in Indian context. Next panelist is Doris Chevalier. She's the CEO of InfraBoost. Doris has been an engineer and expert in project financing for 35 years, particularly in the railway sector. She has participated in more than 20 billion euros of project. She would be the Ministry of Finance in France. She's also for large companies, worked for Alstom, Bouygues, and Vince, and financiers, which gives her a complete vision of PPP financing. Today, she's an independent expert consultant, having founded InfraBoost, and puts her efforts towards impact finance and the circular economy. I've also got Rakesh Chopra, former Indian Railway Board member in engineering. Rakesh is a former head of the Indian Railway Engineering Board. He's a well-known personality in the international railway circles, a brilliant civil engineer. He graduated from the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and he did his master's as well from the same institution subsequently. He did a master's of Phil Punjab University, PGDPA, and the Diploma of Public Administration from the IIPA. He's certified in project management and finance from Berwick, Manchester, and his post-superannuation, he's on the board of government and private corporations. We have Phil Marquis. He's the CEO of Marquis Rail Group. Phil's a graduate of the University of Waterloo with an honors and Bachelor of Science. He holds a master's degree in business administration from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, UK, and he studied transportation geography at York University in Toronto. He's currently leading the Marquis Rail Group as a consultant on rail development and optimization. And Phil has over 40 years of railway experience with the Canadian National Railways, Illinois Central Railroad, ACOM, and Oman Rail. Philip also initiated and set out the Oman Mineral Line Railway Design and Development Plan and the PPP model for that. He's currently involved in a railway bypass plan around a major Canadian city and is working on a PPP rail plan in the Middle East country. Philip sat on the GCC Member State Railway Project Committee and the GCC Technical Operations and Institutional Expert Working Groups. He's a certified locomotive engineer and qualified in railway operating roles in Canada and the United States. Professor Matteo Turro, former director of European Investment Bank. Matteo is a civil engineer, honorary director of the EIB, professor, retired, transport economics at UPC. He's a consultant advisor on transport and urban development, or project appraisal, financing, and PPPs, chairman of the advisory council of CENIT. He's also had multiple publications on transport and urban issues, including books, Going Trans European, Planning and Financing Transport Networks for Europe, Rail Project Appraisal Guidelines, Barcelona, City of Marvels and Jurors, and recently chapters in Making PPPs Fit the 2030 Agenda, and Deciphering the European Investment Bank. So questions we're going to have for the panel today in this order are: what are the challenges during the project planning phase? What precautions need to be taken while formulating the bid documents for a Rail PPP project? What are the major complexities in designing the revenue matrix and risk mitigation plan? And how the dispute resolution mechanism can be utilized during the operations and maintenance of the project. So 4 key questions, and we'll delve into a lot of details and experience, and our panel will have lots to share with you. And with that, I'll take it over to pass it on to Doris, and we'll continue and start on the first question.
A reminder of what is the PPP structure. This is a very standard one, where you've got the public sector signing a PPP contract with an SPV. The SPV is financed by investors and lenders, them being repaid through users or taxpayers. The SPV is subcontracting with a construction contract to civil works contractors for the construction period and for the operation period, including the maintenance, to an operator and the maintenance. It is key to have this scheme in mind because it will influence what we want to demonstrate today is why it is important to anticipate any steps of the PPP, because it is all what will manage the life of the PPP. Why we want to talk about the need of anticipation? Because the project, and namely in rail, will last across generation. And because these projects are heavy investments, and because they need to satisfy the people expectations and the people who basically have been paying the project, should there be taxpayers or end users. These are heavy investments. They require heavy investment in financial and human resources. And also the project must offer reasonable market profitability to attract financiers, because we've seen that the projects are financed by investors and lenders. But also they should not overburn the taxpayers' payments, annual payment over time and over generations. These projects also aim to serve populations in a transgeneration way. This is very important to have this in mind, that you're not building a PPP for a 3 years period, you're building it for 30, 50 years, namely for railway. These are very long-term contracts. So it means that you need to know the needs of the population. You need to know how the needs of the population will evolve over time. So you need to have a clear scope of work. You need to be able, through the duration of the project, to adapt the project to the evolution of the population and not be trapped in something which doesn't work or works only for a 10 years period. And last but not least, I mean, you need to keep also the project in a perfect order and perfect maintenance, perfect working order. So at the end of the contract period with the private sector, you get back something which is still working and not something which is in a bad shape. Let me illustrate with two very quick slides what I mean and why it is needed to anticipate. I found this picture very interesting because these are one of the biggest, the pictures for one of the biggest stations in Paris. That was at the beginning of the 20th century, back in 19th. And this is in 2020. So you see the difference in terms of population. And this is the same station. You can refine the architecture. It is exactly the same. but there is definitely not the same trains, the same people, the same number of people. So you need to anticipate that the things will be changing. And if you do not anticipate it, it will be a nightmare afterward in terms of cost, stop of works, use for the citizen. Next one is about the same. It's a little bit more technical. These were the tracks back in that time, and these are the tracks today. So you see that the maintenance there were 2, 3, 4, 6 tracks. That was quite easy. Now it looks like that. So it has to be illustrated. The next one is a more funny one, but it is to illustrate what we mean by anticipating. If I say, build me a castle, this is basically what I have in mind. But if I do not properly define the scope, this is basically what I might get. So these are funny elements to make you understand why it is important to anticipate. So now let's back to more serious slide. What are the consequences of a poor anticipation or a poor lack of anticipation? This is what I call the Inferno Spiral. That basically says if you definitely poor the needs of the population, then you will have poor competitions amongst the candidates because you will hardly be in a position to compare bids and get the best of the bids. It means that if you poorly define your scope, you will have extra cost, extra delays, more risk into the project. That means a more expensive financing. And in the course of the project, you will have delays and overcost and poor satisfaction in terms of performance, and consequently poor satisfactions vis-a-vis the population. So it is key to have in mind that all those elements are interactive, and you need to properly structure them so that by the end of the road, the project is not in a total disarray at the end of the construction of the contract period. What is also important when we were discussing among ourselves when preparing the webinar is to understand what we are talking about when we are talking anticipation. What does it mean, anticipation? It means, first of all, is to work in a kind of project mode where you measure at each step the consequences of the decision you are taking, both technically, legally, and financially. Technically, it means to build the project according to its operational purpose versus to focus only on construction and then get the people on board and see if they can operate it properly. The design has to take into account the operational performance and the target of the operational performance. Technically and legally speaking, it means that you need to anticipate to include the elements, both technical and legally, meaning the clause in the contracts, to allow the project to evolve over time and to meet the needs of the population in the future, just as we've seen in the previous pictures. In terms of project management, it's key to anticipate project management, organization, governance of the project. Leave no question behind you, leave no question non-answered. And if you do not know, just surround yourself with experts, namely with Rail. I mean, this is something which is very typical to Rail. There are very few PPP Rail experts. So it's very easy to have Rail expert or PPP expert, but to have both, it's quite complicated and it makes really a difference. Last but not least, financially, I mean, you should test the different mode of implementation of the project, technical implementation, legal structure, with regard to the cost and the commitments related to financing. You need to run sensitivities, test the financial market, the appetence of the financial market to get the best of it, so that at any time you are in a position to justify the project vis-a-vis the population, taxpayers, and users. So what to do, how to prepare a PPP? There are 4 key steps in my view. The first one is engineering. I need answer to the question, what do I want to build? When do I want it ready? The second one is with the legal structure. I mean, you have to decline in clauses, in contract, what the engineers have said. So it is with whom I'm going to contract. That's the first PPP structure that we have seen. You need to define all the parties and not forget anyone. How are you going to contract with that? with them, meaning if they don't do what they are, if they don't satisfy their obligation, what will be the penalty regime? And the what if is basically to always be in a position to answer, if things are not going the way I did anticipate, what will happen? What do I do? You need to have a solution. You need to have a board. You need to have a queue period, but you need to have something in there. Then once this is done, you need to finance the project. So how much is that? Can I afford it? Can my population afford that? Or will it be too expensive? What are the consequences of the risk I did not mitigate it yet? And this you need to know in advance, so you have no surprises. And last, once you went through the 3 steps, you go to construction and operation, and there you need in permanence to check performance of the project and have a return on experience. You need to have capacity building through the project so that when comes the next project, despite it is not a rail, you have gained experience and you can improve in the project. So that's basically it for today. And I pass the floor to my dear colleagues. I will stop the screen. She will. Here you are. So open the floor for discussion.
Thanks, Doris. Yeah, do you want to add in? We'll start with the first question. What are the challenges during project planning phase? You touched on some of those points in your presentation, but anything to add to that just at a high level, and then we'll go around the panel.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, for me, the challenge is the first one is political pressure, namely for rail, because I mean, these are very big investments. They will change the landscape of the country. And during the structuration of the project, all politicians want the train in their geographic area. And this is not possible. You cannot satisfy everyone because economically speaking or financially speaking, it doesn't work. So you need to resist to that. And also the second point for me is basically financial pressure. Going the PPP route in rail, one needs to know that it means a minimum of 50% subsidy. This is for each and every rail project. I think there is only one in the world, which is the one in Hong Kong, which was self-sustainable. All the other ones are not. So you need to keep that in mind, because if there is subsidy, it means that you've got a strong pressure from the government so that to be sure that the investment which is made will be profitable, will be both value for money and value for people.
Great. Thanks, Doris. Naresh?
Yeah, I would only, in fact, most of the things she has covered in a very lucid way. I would just add that while planning, one of the major issues is to also do market sounding and market evaluation, because unless there are investors who are ready to invest into the project, it would lead nowhere. And before that, you have to prepare a project information sheet, project information memorandum, which should have basic project details and expected payment mechanism, project outline, and project what is the status of approvals, what are the problems, and enabling works. I mean, what a investor would need upfront. That you have to feed him and know who all are likely to come on board. Do you have those kind of people around before you start planning? Right. And then you also have to evaluate the kind of technical capacity with the construction agencies or the contractors available in your area of influence. So the technology you're trying to deploy, part of a design, whether that can be converted to reality or not. So I'm sure these are some of the things which I would like to add here.
Great. Thanks, Naresh. Rakesh?
Thank you. I think Doris made a wonderful presentation. Doris, that the crux of the whole thing was beautifully brought out. I'll just probably like to add on to something. Extend what you said and add on to something. Interestingly, you did mention about the investors part of it. I have a strong belief, and I've seen it here in India, that unless the investor is associated in the planning of the project, from the day one itself, the project has a lot of difficulties. So we have to find ways. Maybe it is not the investor who's going to be ultimately investing into the project, because that requires to be brought in through a different avenue. But then the client needs to have a very sound investor on board with him. That is one part of it. What I have also discovered, you touched the point on political stuff. That's a very good point. Political will is very, very important. And not only that, the consistency and sustainability of the policy. See, what I have observed here in the Indian context is that a few years down the line, there are changes in the policy. As a matter of fact, the beautiful case is that of our Indian Railways station, world class, making them. And we have gone on for the last 20 years, or maybe more than 20 years. So whenever we reach a stage where we start inviting tenders, the political will starts dwindling. And we have a big, big problem. Or they change the policy and thereby, shift the goalpost far away. Technical side, yes, the wonderful points. I only believe that the scope and the designs must get frozen, before you start really. So you have to freeze these things. You cannot allow any changes that keep taking place over the period of construction or thereafter. So we need to freeze at some stage and have a mutual understanding, both with the client and the contracting agencies that are going to be there. That is actually the body that is going to be running it for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So it is important that they don't. And a good point that was made out was that the government doesn't see that. I think while made in the beginning, the government doesn't see the client as an equal partner, which is very incorrect. And as a matter of fact, in these projects, we have to be sitting on the same table, eating the same meals and having the same drinks. I think that is a very, very important thing. And the last thing that I would like to add in the planning, Doris, is there should be a single window clearance. It's a very important factor. We have discovered in India that if you don't have a single window clearance, there are many issues which just linger on for long, long, long periods. Thank you.
Thanks, Rakesh. Phil, your insight?
Yeah, thank you. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Just to add on to what Doris and Rakesh have said, and Naresh, when you enter into these projects, you have to have a strong technical team at your disposal. Quite often, because it becomes politically charged, the financial people are involved, they forget about the technical aspect of it. And that brings into play, you have to know exactly what you want. Is it high frequency rail? Is it high speed rail? Are you looking at freight, which takes on a whole different set of technical challenges? Or do you want to do a mix of freight and passenger, which seems to be a common occurrence that's happening in some countries? These realistic expectations, how do you find them? You have to do strong benchmarking, as was mentioned. Review other projects, play on other projects, expand on them. Your traffic forecasts, they have to be as accurate as you can get them. They have to be accurate to your territory or your area. You can't take a model that's for Europe and apply it to Africa. So your traffic forecasting, your expectations, it's a politically charged project you're going into, not only on the technical side, but you've got the politics. But to the technical side is so important and quite often is forgotten. They can bring, oh, we'll have this person handle that. When the other team, the private team, they're coming in with their technical experts and they're going to have that in their contracts. They're going to be there. To develop the strong KPIs, they have to be in your favor, or they have to be in the favor of the overall group, both sides, the government or the private, public side and the private side, so that one side doesn't overpower the other. As was said, this has to be a group effort. It's a team that enters into this. So, but challenges, PPP, they're complex and especially complex when the railway projects coming into it. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Matteo?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. I think Doris presented very well the background of what we are going to discuss here. I would more follow what Philip said about trying to get something specific more specific about the rail sector. So here, the first thing I wanted to say is that In the PPPs, we have to distinguish clearly between what the more typical infrastructure, construction, and so on, and some PPPs that are becoming especially common now in Europe, which is about operations. So it's new private ventures coming into the system to operate new services. So here, for example, in Spain, we have now a few private operators in the high-speed rail sector providing competitive services. We have that also in Italy and other places, but that's very important. Second point I wanted to make is that they are the technical difficulties of the system are extremely high. Rail is a very rigid transport mode, has only 1 degree of freedom that constrains a lot of things. They have all these probably everywhere, but especially in Europe, we have a lot of problems related to interoperability. As you know, there are different gauge, different supply, power supplies, signaling, etc. We have to take into account also, especially now that we are discussing a lot about the renewables and so on, the energy supply aspects, because this is going to be a very critical element for the future. So this is a little bit the technical difficulties, which are not probably looking particularly good for rail, especially if we look into the new technologies becoming available. We see more and more these mega trucks around, things like that. So the rail has to concentrate on services that have a great amount of demand, either for passengers, essentially urban projects that still have no competition, or in where we will have major freight flows. This is, where I can see that competition is going to be difficult to expand, even though maybe automated vehicles are going to be hurting somehow in the future, in general public transport. Later on, I would like to make some comments on the other aspects, in particular about ESG and so on. But for the time being, I wanted to put on the table this, very difficult context that from the technical point of view and from the future perspectives of the system, of the model system, of this model transport system are there, and we should be aware of them when planning and designing the system.
Excellent. Thanks, Matteo. Okay, our next question, what precautions need to be taken while formulating the bid documents for a Rail PPP project? We'll start with you, Doris.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that's not an easy question, because it takes very long to answer to that question. I mean, my first one is obviously, as just said, make sure that the scope is well described. I mean, we've been discussing that, and my colleagues have been also elaborating on that. This is very key to be certain that the scope is clear of what you want to do. A scope which is able to evolve over time for sure. I would like to highlight another fact, which is a particularity of the railway PPPs. Make sure that the burden for the private companies party to the project is not too high, namely through bonds and guarantee. In all PPPs, if you remember the scheme I have presented, you've got subcontractors, which are contractor and operators and maintainers. And if there is a default into the project, meaning that there are extra costs or extra delays, the financier will say, this isn't my fault. There is no reason I should suffer from that. So someone needs to indemnify me, i.e. pay for the extra costs or pay for the extra delay or the impact that it will have on my financing. And they do ask this amount of money in advance of the project when negotiating the financing before financial close, and that is translated in performance bonds. which are added to the one asked by the public sector for the proper performance of the project. So because we are talking of very huge amount of money in railway sector, this is minimum half a billion of euro minimum for railway. Performance bonds in a range of 20% is already very big amounts of money, and very few companies can afford it because it is coming directly through their balance sheet. And so if you ask for too many performance bonds or too many guarantees, the consequence will be basically that you will not get a cure of the default. This is not automatic. It depends on the project. You will get money, but you may kill companies on an extreme side. But you will also, and maybe first, disinterest candidates to bid to the project, because they will say, okay, this one is not for me. This will be too strong on my balance sheet, so I will just not candidate. And therefore, the competition within the project will be smaller, and the cost of the project, globally speaking, will be bigger.
Great points. Thanks, Doris. Rakesh?
I'll just add two small points. Again, this is from the experience that we have had here in the SPB projects and otherwise in India. So particularly if they are greenfield projects or if they are brownfield with the greenfield attached to it. And why the greenfield is because to allow them the economic advantage, the revenue generation coming out, because the railway stations and the railway land is very, very little and narrow. And if you're going on the brownfield side, they have a serious problem. So what we discovered is that the responsibility for the acquisition of the land, that is a big problem. Not only it takes time, but subsequently it becomes a football, being thrown from one party to the other party. That must be very clearly defined in the bid document itself. Very clearly whose responsibility it is, and it should be with the win-win intent that we have to go ahead and get it. The second and the third factors that come in along associated with the land is the land use change. Now, I do not know if big problems occur in Europe. In India, we have serious problems of land use change. And that land use change, if it is allowed that it is put onto the concessionaire, it's not an easy job. The government has to actually hold hands there. It has to be the main person leading that thing and getting the land use changes or such like things done for the team itself. Again, the emphasis is on the fact that the government and the contractors are one team. The third factor with the land that comes out is the changing lease costs. Now, in India, what we have is that the policy keeps changing. And that is a good point which Doris had raised, that you have to have a look at the future policy, change in the future policy. For instance, as a matter of fact, even Matthew mentioned about it, Professor Matthew, about the technology that is going to be there. Now, I might start with a diesel engine today. Tomorrow, it might be electric engine. And as he said that the traction, the things are going to be changing. And day after, it might be actually a hydrogen engine. The point is technology is rapidly changing. And therefore, we have to build that in the bidding document itself. Allow that, how that interaction is going to take place and how we're going to take care of that particular risk that comes up there. Then there's anticipatory changes. And lastly, what I would say is, which I think in one of the earlier seminars also, Doris, if you remember, we discussed, Dr. Bana, the language of the bid document. The legal language is too complicated. So somewhere simplicity has to be brought, and particularly that simplicity is needed where the bid evaluation and the revenue shares are concerned. Those in the language, legal language that they put it in, they confuse so much that later on, any one word or one comma or one phrase, it leads onto the other one, and then there are big disputes there. So these are some few points that come to my mind. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rakesh. Phil?
Yeah, just to play on what Rakesh was saying there, it's so true. As technology changes occur, it's got to be written in. am I going to run diesel today because I don't have the infrastructure? But tomorrow we all look to electric. Is there enough electricity being produced in that region to support an urban rail system or a intercity freight or system? It's very expensive to be putting up catenary systems when we're looking at hydrogen, which is just down the road. What options do we give the operator? Do we lock them into something that exists just today? From a political point of view, the environment is very, very important. ESG, everybody's talking it. I know Matteo is going to talk about that in a bit. This is something we have to address today. That's why rail is so important. Rail, from an environmental point of view, is probably the best way we have for moving freight and passengers. We look at this. How do we build that into the documents? How do we give freedom to the operator or the developer that he can change technologies while protecting the environment and protecting the political will? These are things that have to come in. Again, I stress technical advisors have to be brought in at the early stages when you're developing the documents. The financial people, they're set. It's very complex, but they're ready to go into it. We always forget about the technical side. The environmental side is becoming so important today. That comes into that area. When we're looking at it, the change in the future role of the politicians, how they're going to be addressing this, the movement of people, how is it changing? Post-COVID, we're seeing changes in commuter movements in major cities. People have moved away from the cities, but there's still going to be a challenge to move these people as we go forward. So thanks.
Great insight. Thanks, Phil. Naresh?
Okay. I'm going to emphasize on that this bid document preparation arrives after most of the planning has already been addressed. And you are walking right from the ideation stage. You have been walking with all the stakeholders, almost all the stakeholders together. And you have identified your general level of kind of investors and generally who all are going to be participating. Generally, an overview has been developed by now. And as Mr. Rakesh has already said, that the land, which is one of the most important thing, has to be responsibilities. The land risk has to be defined because all the risk have to be defined here in the bid document. Who is going to handle which risk? And also, we have seen, like in HS1 in UK, the major gray area was the traffic projections. The traffic projections were inadequately attended and they were over-projected to such an extent that it appears that they were planning in isolation. And they did not take into account the cheap airlines coming up in the environment. And because of that, when they went in for raising funds, there were no takers. And in 1998, they raised their hands and the government had to come and bail them out, right? So as far as bid documents are concerned, we should have done value for money analysis, value for people analysis, we should have done value for future analysis, and also in the technology age today, value for innovation. The innovations which are going to come in, the technology which is going to, and all that, because it's a long concession period, we need to plan how the evaluations are going to be done. Evaluation program has to be most meticulously planned, that what should be the periodicity, what should be the matrices for evaluation, how would be the weightage given to each matrix, and how would that impact the review of the clauses, right? So whatever you can see, you see today, and whatever you are unable to see, plan a dimension for that, that this is within these dimensions, we'll try and see that, right? And then another thing which has been observed in most of the modern projects which have gone in is the data management, entire data management. We are in technology age. We have to give out very clearly what will be our data management, data capture, data integration, data for survey, and data for projecting. Everything has to be given out at this stage in the bid document. And suffice to say that most of other points though have been covered, but we have to plan right up to the handover if it's a DBFOT kind of format. So all these things need to be integrated at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Naresh. Matteo?
Yeah, I would let me focus because we are in the bidding documents and so on. No? Let me focus on the governance aspect of the ESG. So here in rail we are in an integrated, very often vertically integrated systems. It depends now in Europe it's not the case, but or not the case. In some countries, yes, in others not. It's a bit complicated. It's very bit complicated. But in any case, it is an integrated system where we have these infrastructure managers, we have the operators, and so on. So the reality is that most of them, many companies, many infrastructure operators and so on are public companies, or so are in the public sector, politically controlled, and so on and so on. That's one thing. Another one is because of this, we have a very unionized labor, able to stop the system whenever they want, and so on and so on. Very privileged compared to similar workers in other sectors. So that's, Doris can tell you probably a lot about that, can generate tremendous problems until sometimes, like in this famous case of Rail in France, they ended up selling the company to the public company. You just screw them enough until you'll get the whole system for the public company. So what I mean is that when we decide the bidding or we elaborate the bidding documents, we have to take that into account very seriously. And from my personal view, the only way to cope with that situation and to avoid tremendous, I think Philip mentioned that too, and so on, the possibility of getting bankrupt is to have an independent arbitrage, compulsory arbitrage, where when you have a strike created by something that it doesn't depend on the private promoter. So you can, maybe the arbiter can decide what are the compensations for this or whatever, independently. If this depends on the government, you are dead. That's one of the, I think, the very important points that we should raise at this stage.
Yeah. Doris, you had your hand up?
Yeah, if I may, I mean, this is very interesting. And thank you, Matteo, to have recalled that we are the world's best people in terms of strike. This is one of them. But there has been a strike in the railway sector in France, but never ever because of having a railway sector, and never ever. This is because this is not performing as the population is wanting, or because there are salaries that are not enough compared to the market it represents. This is the reason for strikes, but not because of the existence of rail. And none of the French people would like to go back to buses and waiting buses for hours compared to rail. I was hearing what we were all saying, and I wouldn't like that we were sounding too negative in regards of PPP and railways. Yes, this is complex because it is adding to the complexity of PPPs, the complexity of the railway sector. But it is definitely feasible, and it is not more complicated in a way than packing for moving from one country to another, or packing for a month of vacation. When you have never done it, you do not know what you've got to put in your suitcase. But in such cases, you ask two friends who have already done that, and they give you good advice. It's exactly the same. The message that we want to pass here is that this is complex enough for you to ask to other people if you have never done it before. So to avoid troubles that may occur to you. But however, I mean, this is only logic. and expertise and skills, both skills in PPPs and skill in railways. There is no more complexity than that. I mean, in terms of mass, we are not making more than addition and multiplication, and there is nothing more complicated than that. So I think this was important to say. And also, what is complicated in our sector is basically the interface risk, because in rail, if you compare to roads, for instance, in roads, the guy paying the toll road is the guy bringing the car, and you do not care what kind of car he's bringing. You just paying at the toll booth, and that's it. In rail, you've got to have the passenger in the cars or the parcels in the freight. Plus, you need to have the locomotives. You need to have the right manufacturer of the cars and of the locomotives, and those guys have also their words to say when paying for the old projects. So this is adding some complexity compared to other PPPs. This is why you need the anticipation is even more key when you structure your project so it goes the right way.
I think
Go ahead.
I'd like to add on that too, that within the bid documents and as it's going forward, exactly what Doris is saying, there are longer lead times when you're working on the railway. You can't go out and buy a locomotive and 10 wagons from the neighborhood dealership. It's 5, 6, 7 years out that you can buy this. This gets into the complexity of the revenue matrix as well, but also in establishing the bid documents. Is there experience in it? Do people understand? Are you clear in what you want? Because you can't go out and 2 months before the delivery, you change the scope or you've changed something from the political side. As it was mentioned earlier, you have to stay very rigid or have a very, very structured change process program. But the idea of, I can go buy a vehicle, I can buy it today and I can be on the toll road tomorrow. If I'm going to have a commuter train, I buy it today and it's going to be 7 years from now that it's delivered. And again, that brings all the complexities of technology change and what's happening in the next 7 years. So,
that's true. That's true. And there is also the fact that compared to other PPPs in other sector, you can't change the actors. I remember when I was when we started doing the railway PPPs in France. I mean, all the lenders and so were coming from the road sectors, and so was I. And in the road sector, I mean, when there is an issue with the maintenance and so on, you just change it. I mean, there will be always another company able to do the maintenance and even the operation. But when it comes to rail, you can't change a train manufacturer in the middle of the project. This is not possible. So if there is a default coming from the train manufacturer, okay, you can ask him money. Okay, and if he doesn't have the money, okay, what do? You can't change it. This is not possible. It would mean redoing from zero the project. So that means another form of mind, another way of looking at things, saying that, okay, I'm gonna get married with that guy for all my life. How can I make it happen smoothly and happily? I have to say I've been married for 37 years. Okay. but this is exactly, I mean, you need to accommodate it and to anticipate so that it works well. And these are not the usual tricks of PPP that works in railway. They are different because you cannot change you cannot have any car going on any tracks. Doesn't work like that.
Great points. Yeah, great distinction between that and other sectors. Doris, we'll start with you since we're on the next question. What are the major complexities in designing the revenue matrix and the risk mitigation plan? And you can share your screen if you like as well, if you have anything to.
And I would say, okay, I'll start with the complexity of the revenue matrix, and I'll share something that anyone have to have in mind. Let me share my screen once again. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to have it full screen. It would be easy. Okay. I mean, this is just a recall of how it works in PPP and what are the revenues. You've got that construction period, which is very long for railway sector. Generally, it's about 5 to 7 years compared to other ways, 2 to 3 years maximum. And you've got that operating period, which is also very long, up to 50 years. During construction period, you spend CapEx. And to pay for those expenses, the SPV has got the equity from the investors and the loan from the senior lenders, plus the subsidy from the state. But has no money from revenues. There is no revenue during the construction period. So you've got to wait to be under operation to get the revenues. And the revenues may vary depending if you are an availability model PPP or a patronage model PPP. You've got those operating revenues that will be used to pay first your operating cost. This is first because if you do not operate, you do not have revenue. This is as basic as that. Then you repay debt service, what you owe to your lenders. And last, if there is money left, you pay that to the shareholder for the shareholder return, so that the shareholder are motivated, that it's properly, that the revenues will flow in, the operation went well, so that they can get their payment. So this is how it works. And this is quite key to have always in mind the scheme, to remember that the PPPs need a special risk matrix due to that special revenue stream. For railway, the complexity first lies for me in the scope of the project. Does it include rolling stock or not? If it doesn't include rolling stock, okay, where will they come from? Because if we do not have rolling stock coming from another pocket of the project, what if there is no rolling stock? What if there is no passenger? Who will pay for that? Does it include station or not? Does it include maintenance or not? Is there an imposed operator or not? I mean, all those questions, complexity, are quite key. Namely, also, there is the interoperability part, which is a key point of SDG performance of the project. There's all the thing about safety, but my big one is all determination clauses in the contract. And namely, as I just said before, the fact that the key parties of the project, namely the operator and the rolling stock provider, are not replaceable.
Excellent. Thanks, Doris. Rakesh?
Just 2 points. One is taking it's out of the box thought that we have been having here. And the reason for that is because the point that Doris mentioned, that the earnings start once the construction is over. Now, the point is, how do we bring in some sort of earnings for the concessionaire to begin as early as possible? So what we have been toying here now is that why should some of these people, I'm talking of now the train operators, see, because there are different segments there. And in SPVs where there are freight movements and things like that, we have in a way introduced something of the sort, but not where train operations are concerned. Why should they not be allowed to own a station along with the train operations? Now, that allows them to have an asset, and from that asset to start earning revenues even when they are in the construction period. That is one point. That and we do see it in the railway projects itself. Or as a matter of fact, we have found in India the manufacturing side in the railways, the engine manufacturing or sleeper manufacturing, it went very smoothly and very easily. And the reason was an asset was assigned and they were allowed to capitalize on that asset and earn revenues. The second point that comes down is, again, we have spoken about the political changes and policies that come in there. I'm talking of smaller things, you know, because with the growth, like for instance, in the freight trains, we have had an occasion where a track was made and the concession was entered into for running of freight trains. Now, all of a sudden, the Indian Railways have decided that passenger trains are going to run over it. Now, that, you see, takes away the line capacity. It is a different combination altogether. Now, for that, probably either we put in, or in the contract at the revenue matrix itself, a provision needs to be made, because the government needs to tell that, yes, okay, 10 years down the line, or 7 years, or 8, 10, 15 years, we might consider a passenger traffic movement also. If they allow that, it would get evaluated. If not, then there is a need for the concessionaire to at least consider what changes can occur later on, because of the past experiences that have been occurring on the government that is there. Last but not the least, risk identification. Now, what we discovered was that there are risks in any small stuff also. It's just that we let them go. We just allow them that this, I think, will get sorted out. Now, I think that is an attitude which has been troubling a lot. We can't allow that this will get sorted out along the way. We must identify that risk, start evaluating the impact of that risk, and then mitigation factors need to be brought into the revenue matrix risk mitigation. Mitigation factors have to be brought in there itself, whether they are simple or they are very complex. Even if they are complex, we need to take up that challenge and bring it in the contract document itself that this is a risk. Because otherwise, what we have discovered is that the client has said, don't you worry, when the time comes, we'll have a look at it. We have had this problem with the roads, we have had this problem in the railways, and when the time has come for a small change to take place or a negotiation to take place, the client has just tracked himself back. Big problems have come up. So these were some of the points which I think that we need to consider or introduce in the bid document to see that the risk mitigation is done substantially. Thank you.
Thanks, Rakesh. Phil?
Yeah, great points, Rakesh and Doris. It's the complexity with rail is immense, as we're all talking to right now. The recovery of debt after it's been built, when you go into operations, can be 10, 15 years. How is this going to work? Rakesh, some great things are coming out of trying to do joint ownership and transit-oriented development, which is becoming more and more. That's not always available to freight, although we can look at terminals and how they would work. That the railways or the operators are joint owners in the container terminals or in port operations. It's all there. You just have to think it through to try and get revenues coming back. As we know, the investor is going to be looking for sometimes 15, 16% return on their investment. How can a railway get that back to them as quick as possible to meet their demands? Otherwise, the financial people are going to walk away. We have to look at the whole life cycle cost of the railway. Certain things come in, you have to do major overhauls on your locomotives, and if you're starting in 6 years, then 15 years, you're into rejuvenating the locomotive fleet, your rail, which is also very expensive. Not only just the maintenance, but also we have to look at predictive maintenance to try and save our money, save monies. This is, again, goes back to the technology part of it. Strong KPIs in your revenue matrix. If you know what you're going into, and that's what Rakesh, I think, was stressing, you cannot change midstream. You can't go from a freight corridor and all of a sudden start asking, bringing passenger trains in. If you do, you want to have your subsidies ready. As Doris pointed out, I don't think there's any railway other than Hong Kong is the one we all talk about that actually is getting a return. So subsidies are important. Is there going to be a sovereign guarantee? Who's going to backstop it? If this comes in, it's going to cost. And the operator or the private sector has to know that going in advance. And the public side of it has to understand what that cost is going to be to them. Otherwise, it'll blow up in their face and there'll be problems. So,
just if I could add just a point with what Philip has said, a wonderful point is made. Emphasis on costing itself. See, another thing that very interesting thing while we were planning, what we discovered was that our costing methods, were not so deep. That deep dive was needed to actually start working out that, as a matter of fact, we did a lot of value, addition and planning there. And we found actually in some areas we were able to reduce even, but by and large, the costing becomes a very important factor, because once you have frozen it and there you go beyond it, there are going to be severe implications. Costing, detailed costing has to be emphasized upon.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Doris.
Yeah, and I mean, just what Philip and Rakesh have said is that basically, compared to other sectors, the railway PPP have no financial value, but the social value of the performance of the project. I mean, when you're building an hospital, I mean, you can always have it change into a hotel if it goes wrong or whatever. But rail, you can't sail it. By the end of the road, it just has no financial value. If it doesn't work, I mean, you've got cars, you've got rails, and this is it, and nobody wants to get it. It means that, and it brings back to the fact that these are heavy costs. There are two parameters that explain why anticipation is very key. You need to have strong exchange with the population so that they are satisfied with the service that will be rendered by the end of the road. And this is why you need to keep on checking with the population that the money you will ask them to put in the project up front, because they will have to repay it over time, is equal to the expectation they have, because otherwise they are putting their money for nothing. And this is really key. And this is something that explains also why in France we did not add any strike about having a new train. This is because the consultation period ahead of launching the tender of the PPP is very long, takes a lot of time. There is many consultation with the population. And once the government is launching the project, once they signed it, they signed in over time, whatever change of government there is thereafter. I mean, there is something in France which is, I mean, any government respect the state signature. This is something which is very key in PPPs. Once one government has signed it, the other will have to do what the previous one have decided. So there is a strong burden on one government when they decide. And I've been working for one government, so I can tell you that you are challenged when you go for those projects. But this is very key for the success of the projects.
Okay, thanks, Doris. And Naresh, I'll get you guys in. We're at the 9:30, just after 9:30 Eastern time. We still have a few questions from the audience. We have one more to go. Go ahead, Naresh.
Okay, I will just talk about what Doris was saying. It is regarding the importance of such a long duration intervention like a rail project. There was a study done for this HS1 of UK in 2013 by Atkins and Acom. And that was primarily for capturing the wider economic impact. And they have highlighted there that the benefit cost ratio should be worked out before you go for bidding, right? And it should always be more than one, but it has to capture the values which are intangible at this stage. Tangible is fare box revenue. Tangible is the rent which can come from shops, office, commercial spaces, and things like that. But the intangible part is the regeneration which is going to happen alongside the railway. For some people, it's going to become a lifeline. For the business community, the time is reduced. Firms will come closer to the customers, and employees and partners are going to come together. And overall, there will be a cascading effect towards further and further development. Now, that needs to be factored into whether you call it socialism or subsidy, but it's better that there are models available which should be put into practice, and it should be made part of the bidding document that yes, this is how it will be done. And this part, like in one of the metro here in India, 45% of the revenue is expected and to come from the real estate development. Accordingly, that has been allocated, something on the lines of Hong Kong, what we talked about, right? So that will make the entire revenue not deficit, but the BCR, the benefit cost ratio, will be more than 1. And this wider economic impact, it has to be institutionalized and legislated accordingly and put in the bid document. The second part is about the risk, that risk sharing. As we have already, we have been discussing and studying, the person or the entity between public and private, whosoever can influence that risk better, has to be assigned. And there are some places where they have to work it out together. And in the technology age today, we have possibilities, something like in India, we have worked out a portal called Gati Shakti, where it's like a single window, what Mr. Chopra was mentioning, where all the stakeholders, they can resolve their issues and the project is not delayed. So these are some of the issues which are at revenue and risk stage.
Thanks, Naresh. Matteo?
Yes, I think that, you raised two of the points that I was trying to make also. One is this, when you think about development, greenfield projects, in particular, as you mentioned in India or whatever, or Hong Kong or whatever. So in reality, these projects are not rail projects, that are development projects based on rail. So if you incorporate then the stations and the areas around the stations, and you have a lot of housing being developed or whatever and so on, then it's probably the only way to make this type of projects profitable. But then you are well beyond what is simply a rail line and with the stations. Okay, so you have to be and so on. And that, in this case, the whole, let's say, PPP depends a lot on the housing market. We have seen, for example, here the biggest project here in Catalonia is Sagrera Station in Barcelona. And the whole thing was based on building a lot of housing units around the place, shopping malls, whatever, and so on. So when that was based on the financial crisis situation. So afterwards, the real estate market collapsed, and now they are building the thing slowly. I don't know, but nothing compared to what was foreseen at the beginning. So you see, this is very important. The other thing that I wanted to make, and answering to Doris, is that of course everybody will accept a rail line, because this is additional service, fantastic, and it's going to be subsidized. Why should they oppose something like that? Only those NIMBYs or whatever will oppose to this. And we have the case in Spain. We have, as you may know, we are the second country in the world in terms of high-speed rail lines in length after China, which is a crazy situation. I have done studies with some students of mine, and some of these lines, you wouldn't believe it, at the end of the day, there is very little that it goes to the region developed. So on top of that, you have a very important, and I am going into the ESG, the social aspect. These lines are going from city to city, main city to main city. So whilst, for example, a motorway is distributing the impacts substantially across the area that is crossed, this type of lines, especially high-speed lines, they only benefit the main cities. So you have to be very careful with that, and you will realize that things are not as simple as say. So my conclusion is that this is complex, and you have to analyze it carefully with the specialists who understand very well all the implications, and also take into account that in the long term there are many issues that are absolutely unknown, and you have to foresee mechanisms to to comply with the concept of the PPP, that the private sector should make reasonable profits and should be very efficient in doing that. That's the basic principle of it.
Great. Thanks, Museo. Our last question here, I'll start with you, Doris. How the dispute resolution mechanism can be planned to be of use during operations and maintenance of the project?
Well, I think it has to be anticipated since the tender documentation. First of all, you need to anticipate the dispute board and mechanism within the tender documents. Because quite often, I mean, they are settled once the problem are there, which is an issue. I think also they definitely need to include the public sector civil servants. One problem I've seen in rail is that quite often on the public sector side, you've got guys who are there for 3 years and then changing within the administration, changing of job within the administration, while in front of them, they've got people who, from private companies who are experts and doing that all their lives. So it's quite important, if you want to have a balanced dispute board, that the governments invest in having experts in rails and in PPPs. I think this is quite key for them if they want to get the best defense of their interest. Then I would say, I mean, once again, I mean, you need to have experts on board and you need to select your expert from day one, not, I mean, I've seen that in many cases. I mean, you've got a call from a government saying, okay, my project is going wrong. Can you do something? This is for next month. And you've got 6,000 of pages of contract to read to understand where it's going when you've got the information. So I think it's important to manage the contract, and this should be part of the dispute board. I mean, the dispute board, if you don't want to have any dispute, you need to have contract management and common contract management.
Yeah, I know, just to add to that, Doris, avoidance and a partnering approach right from the outset is probably the best. So sort of set it on a good footing. So avoidance of ultimately having a potential dispute. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, normally speaking, if you have properly structured your project, there is no dispute.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just come in here? Sometimes, especially it's been seen in the railways context, and let me quote a little in a lighter way, that we had a delegate from one of the South Asian countries in Geneva, and when he was telling about the railway PPP in his country, he said, there is no partnership. Our contractor can never be our partner.
Oh.
So the dispute right away starts there.
Oh.
You see? So
yeah,
until you feel that you are part of the same team and you communicate accordingly, you have good rapport, you can sit and smile together, the disputes will be there. So you have to work on dispute avoidance. And for that, a good communication, good team spirit is needed. And it has to be taken forward to dispute management right at the point of initiation. And then there has to be a standing dispute board and then conciliation teams. I mean, you cannot let it go to litigation and arbitration.
Depends. I mean, you need to have, as Rakesh mentioned earlier this afternoon, easy to read contracts, because this is key. I mean, normally, I mean, a child of 5 years should be able to read and understand what is the basic of the contract if you want to avoid disputes.
Okay, thanks, Doris. Rakesh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll hit straight on the arbitration part of it. Avoidance is very necessary, and as mentioned by Naresh and Doris, it has to work as a team. Both the client and the contractor are actually sitting, I sat on the same table and the same drinks. They have to sit down if they want to box it out amongst themselves, break each other's nose, but come to a conclusion by the end of the day. Having said that, I'm firmly of the view that what is happening today is, despite the fact that UNCITRAL has come out with some arbitration guidelines, but they have not been followed by each of the countries. As a matter of fact, I was studying in the forum, I was trying to see the different arbitration approaches, and I found that it is getting costlier in each country. And each country, like for instance, UK or Japan or any of these countries, have a different method altogether. My viewpoint is, number one, we must avoid arbitration. Arbitration, unless it is under something like the SIAC, Singapore method, where the time and the cost is fixed. The time and cost is fixed. You have to present your case in the 3 hearings that you get, and the opposition presents in the 3 hearings they get, and the decision comes in a matter of a month and a half to 2 months. Now, that is a fine arbitration. Otherwise, UNCITRAL has brought in the concept of conciliation. And with what we have been saying, that there has to be a mutual teamwork. Within the teamwork, conciliation is now legal. And once the conciliation is legal, it allows you to actually sit across the table and don't go through the cost and the time of arbitrations, and resolve your disputes there and then. Of course, the courts, it is open to the courts after that. Going to the courts is going to be a big problem. Everybody realizes that. So we must emphasize strongly not to have a dispute. It should not be there. They should be resolved. And if at all it does come up, resolve it through conciliation. And thereafter, there is no other way. If you don't resolve, forget about it. Keep paying what you're paying. I mean, it's a very strong thing I'm putting forward, but I think we have to bring it in PPPs, which are for a long duration. Particularly, my fears are in the operation period. In the construction period, we may not have that difficulty. It can get resolved because everybody's interested in making his money and getting out, other than the operator. In the operations side, between the government and this, because there it is a relationship purely between the government and the concessionaire. Government is dicey. So we just have to push this conciliation bit through the government, and they should accept it.
Great. Thanks, Krish. Phil?
Yeah, really, really good points. Good communication, easy to read contracts. We used to make a comment when we would be reading even small contracts. You could tell which one was written by a lawyer and which one was written by an operating person. Very, the lawyer, we couldn't understand it. And it would go to arbitration, and it would take people months to read it and understand it.
Yeah.
So that's important. The other thing is, during the construction, right from the beginning, good document control, good communication, have a good system that everybody signs on to. If one side doesn't like the document control system because they think it's bureaucratic, they're fighting the system already. You have to have that. You have to have good change control processes in place. All of this leads to or prevents you from having to go to arbitration. You don't want to do that. So, but if it is, have yourself protected right from the beginning. Protected on both sides as a team. You have to enter into it that way. Because if somebody's thinking that, oh, there'll never be a partnership here, there's never a team here, that's wrong right from the beginning. You cannot have that. You have to fight that culture on both the private and the public side. It's very, very important that the public side, the public entity, the ministries have strong technical people on staff, because rest assured that that private operator out there, he's got strong technical people, and they'll pick your pockets if you're not prepared to protect yourself and your side of the contract. So,
yeah. Good points, Phil. Matteo? You're on mute, Matteo.
Yes, I think Rakesh put the thing very clearly, but I wanted to insist on some specific of railways. One is that, for example, cost overruns and delays are particularly high in rail projects. As Professor Fliber has demonstrated that in major projects, they go sometime on average around 40% cost overruns. The delays are enormous, and so on and so on. So of course, if there is a PPP, that's what we should is exactly what we should try to avoid. But it means that the system itself has a lot of the complexity, as has been mentioned here, creates a lot of problems regarding the the development of the project, and it is very necessary to have some mechanisms to achieve some solutions. From, at the end of the day, is arbitration or the courts, unfortunately. But this is, you have to be very careful on that. The other one is how do we integrate our system with the other things like the energy? We have been tremendous movements. The cost of energy. How is it incorporated into the bid? And there are lots of things that they are impossible to foresee now for a very long period. That is typically the rail. So therefore, I think it's more necessary to establish the basic conditions of the project, what is expected from the public, what is expected from the private, and then in a relatively simple way, not all the details, because these, they're not going to be there, these details in 10, 15 years. So the concept is going to be there, and then the conciliation and eventually the arbitrage are going to be based on that, not on the details of these 600-page documents, which from my point of view are not necessary.
Okay, thanks, Matteo. We're running not too bad on time. We still have some time left, so I'll get right into the questions from the audience. This is a question directed for Doris. I wanted to find out from Doris, what can we do or perhaps innovate to unlock the appetite for metro rail, especially in Africa, without affecting the fiscal balance? And are there savings doing overhead rail versus land rail?
That's a very good question, because unfortunately, there are many countries in Africa which are under IMF scrutiny. And I don't know why. This is something which is within IFM. They decided that PPP is not good, and that people should not go that route. I think the main point is to make the demonstration to lenders and tax users that PP railway debt is good debt. And in order to do that, you need to have a good project, meaning that you need to have a transport national plan that demonstrates the social benefit of having this extra burden. And that allows you to borrow debt over generation, over 25, 30, 50 years, and that decrease the annual burden over one generation. Then I think the other solution is, as it was mentioned by Rakesh, to go through real estate solutions. I mean, the stations can bring many money to the project. It's also through the land acquisition, but also through services. Once you think about rail in terms of services to passenger and not only rail and construction and trains, then it becomes far more profitable. For instance, namely in terms of advertising, this can be very interesting for telecommunication companies and so on. So there are other ways of structuring PPP than the old 1960 ways that we had in Europe. There are new ways of doing things which are far more adapted to African countries and their fantastic dynamic economic position.
Great. We have a raised hand from the audience. Amy, go ahead. You're on mute. Go ahead, Amy. Okay, we'll come back. Yeah, you're on mute. Go ahead, Amy. You're on mute. Okay, we'll maybe come back. Another question, I guess I'll start with you, Naresh. What are the technologies for greener rail freight operations? Great question.
The technologies as we see today for greener freight operations are primarily in the field of hydrogen, and electric has been always there. So these are the two technologies which are primarily being focused. Okay.
Go on, Phil?
You can add.
Yeah, and to back up on there, electric has been there, but it doesn't give the tractive effort you need Whereas hydrogen, the promise coming through, a number of different companies are starting to test it. We're seeing it very, very attractive for passenger trains. Yeah. Being tested in Europe, the UK now. There's Canadian Pacific Railways has developed their own in-house hydrogen freight locomotive that they're going to begin testing, if they haven't already, between Calgary and Edmonton, a fixed test track, if you will. And it's very, very promising. The locomotive manufacturers, and talking with some of them, they don't think it's quite there yet, the main locomotive manufacturers, but I think the technology is changing so quickly. It's the fact that we have to figure out how we can transport it and store it. Is ammonia going to be the way to do it? And as I say, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, everybody would have said this is a pipe dream. Today, we're running trains in Europe with hydrogen. It's definitely, in my opinion, it's the way to go. It's really, really promising.
Cool. Go ahead, Rakesh.
Again, a deviation from this. I'm giving an example of the heavy haul, particularly the Australian heavy haul that is there. See, they've done a wonderful job by monitoring the totally with the IoT based stuff. I'm not saying electric or hydrogen, be what there is, but the point is to reduce that quantum of energy also. So if we can reduce the carbon footprint, then that we can reduce that. What they have done is a wonderful piece through the use of IoT on their rigs. And they are traveling long and they're carrying heavy stuff. So I think there is a need to start looking at emulating some of those technologies for our passenger trains and our normal freight trains elsewhere also.
Great, thank you. Doris?
I think that there is a lot to be done, and my dream is, I do not understand why freight cannot be changed in passenger and the way around. For the time being, you've got passenger trains and you've got freight trains. If manufacturer were to work on a way to mix both, in a term that, I mean, in some, namely for lorries, I mean, you can change the boxes. I mean, if you can do that for trains, you can optimize the use of the tracks. The issue, and namely that we have in Europe, is that we are oversaturated. I mean, the track use is saturated. I mean, the trains are going in some cases every 10 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's huge. And the point that we have also, if we have bottleneck at the arrival of big cities. I mean, all the trains, for instance, cannot arrive in the same time in Paris. There is not enough space. So there is a bottleneck, and this needs to be organized between freight and passenger trains. But this organization itself has a limit, which is a mathematical limit. So you need to optimize a little bit more in terms of services, and this is not yet done, but this is going to be for the future on the top of hydrogen.
Yeah, excellent. Matteo? You're on mute.
No, the train technology is going to evolve quickly. I think so. This has a problem is that, for example, there is a trend to electrify lines, but in parallel we are having hydrogen. So we have to make sure that the cost benefit of these investments in electrifications is correct. So some technical forecast in the innovation in the system is very important. That's one thing. Another one is that the technology in the other modes of transport, in particular in road transport, but also in the aviation. So one of the justifications now in Europe to prevent short trips by air is that the pollution, whatever. If there is as it is developing quickly, some synthetic fuels, whatever, to replace kerosene, then we might have also this justification for high-speed trains is going to be reduced. So, when we look into innovation, we have to look into the train innovation, but also on the other modes.
Yeah, and maybe also for the safety. I mean, there has been PPP, namely in Spain, the high-speed line Albacete-Alicante, which was a PPP for electrification. And that was really added value to the safety of the line. Mm-hmm. You can do PPPs in railway in different modes, either in construction of a new line or step by step. I mean, you can have the infrastructure or the superstructure or the only the electrification. And this is very interesting also.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris. We've reached the 90-minute mark. So we've managed to get a couple of questions in over and above our four key core questions. Great discussion, and certainly impressed by the number of professionals and participants we've had today. And I want to thank everybody for participating. Great panel, great interaction, engaging discussion, and great points raised. So I'm sure a lot of people absorb and take that away. We will publish shortly a summary of today's webinar on the WAPPP.org website, and there'll be a recorded video available on our YouTube channel, as well as on the WAPP LinkedIn shortly. And don't forget to listen to our last episode that's on there of the WAPP Airport chapter on the WAPP YouTube channel. And appreciate everybody coming today and participating, and thanks very much.